Well, hello everybody. Louis Trepanier here, and today we are interviewing Norbert Kraft. If you don't know who Norbert Kraft is, you should not be watching this interview. You should go off and do something else with your life because, my goodness, in Canada, if there's one guitarist who can really should be a household name in Canadian guitar, it's Norbert. Hello, Norbert.
Wow, that's a cool intro. Hello, how you doing, Louis?
I'd like to
Awesome.
say I planned it, but I kind of I winged that. But it's true though, right? Um, I can well, you know that I can't think of another Canadian guitarist who, at the height of their career, would have had the like just the I'll use the word. It's funny to say, market penetration, if you will. There was a time when there was this thing called the CBC that really helped and promoted artists, and you were in great years of that. So your career, like, I mean, I don't know of anybody who's played with as many orchestras in Canada and abroad as you have in our guitar world, in our Canadian guitarists.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting. Interesting you mentioned that CBC, unfortunately, has kind of withered to the point where we only really get a few hours of classical music on CBC nationally. And at the time when my career was really in its full flower, we had CBC all day long and other classical stations as well, which played truly classical music most of the time, not movie music or video game music or any of the other stuff that seems to kind of hit the airwaves these days. However, notwithstanding, musicians have a way of getting back on their feet when funding dries up or when other support kind of withers. And we were fortunate enough to have tremendous Canada Council support for touring, for all kinds of things. CBC was perhaps the first big step in my career that kind of, in a sense, put me on the map in terms of, first of all, management. I was able to get true professional management for my career. Plus, at the time, the CBC competition, which I won in 1980, I'm guessing I can't remember, 1980-ish, which had an orchestral component, a concerto component, of which the one of the main judges was Alexander Lagoya at the time. And it was wonderful because it allowed orchestras and conductors and orchestra managers to hear the so-called talent that was being offered by the CBC competition. Having won the grand prize, or at least shared it with Ben Hepner, it then allowed me to have literally annual performances with every single orchestra in the country, as well as other countries. But it really gave me a fantastic start to my career. And I have to say that we're kind of starting at the other end of my career in that the final years of my touring and playing, I was mostly playing concertos. I was mostly playing concertos with orchestras, not only all the Canadian orchestras, of which some of them don't exist anymore, but certainly all the major orchestras and the smaller orchestras, as well as Boston Pops and the Malaysian Symphony Philharmonic and so on. But I was always really focused in my career on developing chamber music. I felt, even in my early studies, I studied with, for example, there was a wonderful Baroque cellist in Toronto that I studied with, Peggy Sampson, and we worked through the Bach cello suites with her. It was just fantastic. I didn't work on these with guitarists per se. I worked with this wonderful Baroque cellist whom I had access to at the time in Toronto. I went to piano master classes, violin classes, and so on. Ultimately, I married what I call a real musician, a pianist, my wife, Bonnie.
I did the
Uh,
same thing.
yeah.
I I
You
didn't
married my
marry one.
wife?
We know that. Yeah, my wife's a pianist as well.
Yeah, yeah. So isn't that wonderful? So we have a much broader view of the guitar and of music. I'm listening to symphonies and all the time, as well as piano music and chamber music. So back to my own career, I've focused a lot on trying to develop myself as a what I call a real musician, not just a guitarist. And all of my musical choices on my own instrument, as well as together with other people, were based on music that I heard, music that I listened to in chamber music from all the greats, Beethoven, Mahler, Wagner, and so on. Um, so a lot of my career then was then developed through playing with other people, not just solo concerts, which I really did and enjoyed an awful lot, but playing with other people, with singers, with string players, with flute, with cello, and so on.
Yeah, you learn a lot by many of the other orchestral instruments, the chamber music pool they're in orchestra chambers. They get to learn from each other and just develop this thing. We are kind of our own little thing, and we're kind of happy that way. But when you start to play with, say, a violinist, and you go,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm practicing this for a month," and he just read it and he took it too fast for me, you know?
Not to mention the breathing of a flute player, the phrasing formed through the breathing, or the bowing of a string instrument, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Well, let's sort of speak, if you will, of breathing and bowing in a way, and let's go to what I always like to ask in these interviews is sort of where did music and then maybe the guitar right away, or maybe the guitar was a later thing than music itself, but where did those two elements come into your life?
My very first introduction to music was, I'm sometimes embarrassed to say, well, my mother was a pianist, so I did learn the piano as a young child when I was 6, 7 years old. But she was an amateur pianist, and I was by no means studying the piano in a serious way. My father played a lot of instruments, but the accordion, and I'm embarrassed to say, was my very first instrument. Despite all the cartoons and everything else from Far Side and so on, the
Yeah,
accordion was
yeah.
kind of my first actual instrument that I played on a regular basis,
Oh wow.
played on daily.
There's this, I forget, like, I forget who the quotee is, but it's something like a Tom Waits kind of quote or something like that is a gentleman is somebody who can play the accordion, but chooses
Ah,
not.
not to, has the courtesy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, soon after I gravitated to the guitar as a played in a rock band, and that
Right.
was principally because I mean, so many reasons, but I played the electric guitar in rock bands, in high school bands, and so on. And
Right.
I mean, we didn't tour a lot. We practiced a lot. I mean, we rehearsed quite a bit, and I played at school dances and stuff like that. But
I
that
mean,
had its limits.
you're the like perfect age bracket of people to have sort of been a teenager during the 60s. There's a whole,
Yeah,
there's an earlier generation that had like, Little Richard and Elvis. But like for everything Beatles, Yardbirds, and like the blues revival and all those things, I mean, you would have been, 14 or so when the Beatles did Ed Sullivan, right? That's
yeah,
about as good as it gets. The music you fell in love with when you're 14 or 15,
yeah,
it there's
exactly.
something that always stays there, right?
Exactly. And though it was a wonderful experience playing in front of people, and I really feel that some of my abilities to communicate to an audience stemmed from that time when I was able to actually communicate to a high school dance, for example, where some people were dancing, but many people were actually listening, and one had to be an entertainer, as it were.
Right. Can I just ask, because I'm sure people listening to this who went through a similar path. I know I did. I was like pop rock guitar before I got into this classical thing. But just like, do you remember like the repertoire that you like the era and the repertoire that you like if you just throw out a couple songs? Because I'm sure people who have played dances like that would go, oh, okay, that too,
It's so funny because occasionally things come on the radio, and the stuff that comes on the radio that my wife lights up to is a Mozart concerto or a Haydn concerto, or right, and she even played the violin. So occasionally the odd Tchaikovsky symphony that she had played in, right, stuff that comes on the radio would be like early Beatles songs, the Rolling Stones during that time in the 60s, 60s up until 1967-ish, something like that. So the Birds, the Yardbirds, as well. Um, Booker T and the MGs. Do you remember Green Onions? No.
God, I love that too. I used to play thing I did as an electric guitar player before I thought, you know what? I'm not getting better at this and I'm, gonna sell my equipment and just have the last thing I did was in an R&B band and the singer was this older, really distinguished black gentleman who was originally from Barbados. And he had the gravelly voice like this, and he had the moves, and he had it was so much fun. And so we did all that, Motown and Stax and,
Yeah.
often Green Onion was like one of the intro tunes before the singer came on. So
Yeah, exactly.
so much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was the time also when Dom Troiano was playing in Toronto. I mean, we would go around to clubs and hear these people who have become legends in essence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that to me was limited. To me at the time, this was really before the Beatles had evolved through whatever process it was to the things that they did in the last 4 or 5 albums. This was when really kind of four chords were the mainstay of pop music. And I felt I was getting very interested in jazz. I loved listening to Wes Montgomery and Kenny Burrell and these guitarists who were the jazz greats at the time. And I really wanted to study jazz. I wanted to, find a way of becoming a better informed guitarist at the very least, or be able to play jazz. And so I called the conservatory, Royal Conservatory in Toronto, and they said, "Oh no, my dear, you must study classical music here." So I did that, thinking, thinking if I learn the guitar the right way, I can do anything. How wrong I was, but it turned out that that's exactly what I was looking for, an endless challenge.
Yeah. That's not to make the interview about me, but just to say, like, I really understand. That's exactly what I did. I was playing, I was loving things, and I thought, in the pop world, as you just expressed, this idea that if you want to become the best electric guitarist in the world, study classical guitar. It's risible when you're on the inside of the classical guitar world, because it's not the same instrument. If anything, you might want to study violin if you want to be one of those flashy players, right? But you do this as a way of seeking more education, more information, and maybe you learn classical gas and stuff like that, and then you start discovering the music, and then you become part of the family of people going back, who would have played in Beethoven symphonies when Beethoven was alive. You're part of that larger tradition, and you find yourself in that, and that's exactly what I went through. In 20 years later, but still the same process, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so Royal Conservative of Toronto, you just signed up for lessons, and
Yep.
I was
And they put me with a teacher who, when I first met with him, was Carl van Tragelen, who was a very inspiring, um, what's the word? I mean, he was very incredibly encouraging. He played the guitar quite beautifully to my ear, at least. He actually played concerts. He was actually, a very good figure for me at the very beginning of my first 4 or 5 years of lessons as a
or
beginner classical
yeah,
guitarist.
for the history of classical guitar in Canada. It's just a sheer, I guess we'll call it luck, that he arrived in Canada, because he fell in love with a Canadian woman, because was he Dutch? Or
Dutch, yes.
so when I did a pre-concert interview with Dale Kavanagh when she was playing in Ottawa in September or October it was, and
Yeah.
she same thing, like, here's this person that had, like, real information, was like a real, in the larger school of, with people who'd studied under going back Segovia or Taraga even, um, and we wouldn't have had such a person in our midst if he just hadn't moved here.
Yeah, yeah. Strange coincidence. In fact, I remember distinctly my first lesson with him. I always felt that I should be studying with a professor with a gray beard and somebody who was older. And he was, I guess at the time, I was 17. He would have been maybe 10 years older than me, not even, maybe. So maybe he was 30, if that. And I was a little disappointed because I thought he should be a professor. He should be older. He should be
At the
50
fight,
or,
yeah.
yeah. Well, he did have the fight, but he didn't
Oh,
have and he had the beard, but he wasn't an old guy. And anyway, so I realized very soon on that he really knew his stuff. He played the clarinet as well. He played
oh,
other instruments. Yeah, yeah. He played apparently in some sort of an orchestra before he came to Canada. Anyway, what was wonderful about him was that he could demonstrate beautifully. He had a nice sound. He had a real respect for the instrument and for its sound. And he didn't hold me back, which in a sense maybe wasn't a great thing, but he could see, I think, that I was eager and talented, and I didn't work especially hard, I guess, in the first year, but I had something behind me and a certain amount of skill already. Um, but he didn't kind of hold me back to the point where I had to finish grade 1 before the first year and grade 2 the
yeah.
next year and so on. But he took me basically all through the conservatory grades, which was great. And the wonderful thing about it was, which really kind of, I think, made a big step up in my mind professionally, was that he enabled me to have a teaching position. It was in a community music school, but it was teaching classical guitar. It wasn't kind of a basement studio kind of, it was really a classically oriented community music school. And I had 40 students a week, mostly kids, but there were adults as well. And I really felt, oh my God, this is great. I have a job teaching, full-time job, 5 days a week. And before too long, because of that, and because of my, again, eagerness to learn and so on, he also enabled me to have a teaching position at the conservatory, the Royal Conservatory. And at that point, I really thought I had died and gone to heaven. That was my ultimate. I had never dreamed about being anything more than just a teacher. If it's possible to have a secure career as a guitar teacher, awesome. So
Wow.
I owe it to him, in essence, for any of that.
It's part of the family tree story of classical guitar. Like it's very similar to sort of like, the mid 20th century jazz story where you get, Miles Davis apprenticed under Charlie Parker, became a
Yeah.
leader in his own right, and then look at like all the people that are big names in the jazz world that first apprenticed under Miles Davis, and then he sent them off on their own. We have a similar story from, you have these people who were important teachers in certain areas, and then they would spot future talents, and they were able to do things for them and get them in positions where opportunities then would come, and you could fly from your own steam after that.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's and very often the teacher oversteps the student, and then that becomes the teacher who is overstepped by another student, and so on. And we have this tremendous ladder, which I've seen grow. Obviously, you have too, from the mid 60s until now, the amazing abilities of the younger players, not just technically and physically. I mean, that was a time 20 years ago already. We had people that had amazing fingers. Now we're getting musicians that have amazing fingers playing the guitar.
I've seen it in the last little while. There was a phase after my student years where the ability just skyrocketed, but I still felt disappointed by certain players who had these great abilities, but like, there's
The
something
musical
there.
mindset was not.
It's like, well, when you get to the B section of your piece, you're playing a whole different tempo. It's not the same piece. Just these
Yeah, yeah,
musical ideas. And then in the last, I don't know even know how many years, but like if you watch the people who win the GFA, my God, the expression, like
yeah,
the whole chops thing is just a given.
yeah.
They're pianistic in their abilities, but my God, the expression is so. These things. It is an accordion. Pardon the pun. Between you can't do certain expressive things till your technique is a certain way, and then they pass each other and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's like that.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, and I'm seeing a lot of these competition winners, of course, with the recording work that I do.
Yeah,
We're recording winners of the major competitions in the world every year. And God, it's scary.
yeah, it is. You think like, oh, I'll just put my guitar away. But I do want to say, like, certain recordings of yours, and the first ones that comes to mind is the Villa Lobos Etudes recording. They chops for chops, they stand up with any of today's 25-year-old hotshots,
Oh,
really.
thank you.
So it's like there's a few benchmarks that were set. Like I think of that album and some of the things the Romeros did and the Assads did that still today, just purely on a like scale of impressive feats of daring do on the guitar, they still go, yeah, that young kids today are still trying to match those, and
Oh, that's nice.
I guess they when they do match them, they match them sooner or there's more of them. But there's still a few outliers like you who are like make the rest of us go, oh man, cut off my arms.
I don't think so. That's very nice of you to say. Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, we hope that we do recordings that
Yeah.
stand the test of time, that basically last our lifetimes and more. But
Oh
who
yeah.
knows? Again, with the recording industry, what does anybody have CDs anymore? I mean, yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of recordings, audio only recordings, will keep going because I think in the current phase where many people make videos and performance videos of that, you don't go back and rewatch a performance video over and over again the way you listen to a favorite audio recording over and over again. And maybe it has the fact to do that you can't go jogging and watch a video or drive and watch a video, but audio only is something you can absorb while you're doing something else, but also you just to sit and listen, and so I think the audio only recording in whichever form it's delivered seems to still have an importance.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
We are going through some kind of a transition where, well, everything is transitory anyway, where in the 60s and 70s and 80s, recordings were the be all and the end all, the LP. Remember those black plastic thing, LP, was for life. It was a record for life. And it was to me, and I think musicians of my generation, to make a recording was not only one of the scariest things you can do as a musician, one of the most important jobs we have. And we're setting down our ideas or our notes for life, for all of history, as it were. I don't have the feeling that today any musician, or especially younger musicians, have that same kind of mindset when they come to a recording. Yes, they're recording what they believe in and what they've worked at and so on. And not that they haven't worked hard at perfection and making it really clean and perfect, but I think they realize that next year the CD could have disappeared. I mean, the whole media could have disappeared, will disappear.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's yeah, I have the same feeling where nobody the idea of some recording is the recording of some piece.
Uh,
People don't like that idea anymore.
yeah.
People like I was of an age when certain recordings to us were the recording of a piece, and I don't think that myself anymore either. Like
Yeah.
I was around then, but my thinking has changed on the matter as part of the collective zeitgeist.
Yeah,
So
and I'm not sure that musicians necessarily feel that. Well, Andrew Bilsma, for example, has recorded the Bach cello suites 3 or 4 times. Gould did his first and last thing with the
yeah,
Goldberg variations, and so on. So many musicians have taken another stab at major works in their repertoire. And boy, when I listened to the Villalobos record that you mentioned, I would do things differently. So it was
well,
15, 20 years ago.
we can fawn over it, but when when the artists themselves listen to it, they're thinking, yeah,
Yeah,
you know.
my
But it's
God. Yeah.
a funny thing how, like I kind of when I do recording projects and I'm going to listen back and like build up the editing map, I on purpose I try not to get to it too soon after the recording
Yeah.
because I'm so disappointed by what I hear at first. But if I give it a few days, I like it more, and it's you
Days,
know
more like months.
actually you need time to forget what happened and
Yeah.
into it.
It's
Um,
funny. Julian Bream and I used to go, well, Bonnie and Julian and I used to go drinking after his concerts whenever he was here. And he said basically the same thing. Oh, God, when I listen to those things, I want to do it all. I just want to give up the guitar.
and if there's anybody whose recordings are loved over time and time again and stuff, it's him.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we did touch on like to build sort of an arc of your performing career and teaching career. Before we went back to the beginning, we did get to through winning CDC competition, you got concertos, and that was a big deal because I've done not that many, but I've done enough of those with the quartet that it's a fun gig to play with even a medium orchestra. Um, but to play with a really well set up orchestra where the players and the infrastructure around the orchestra and the hall and this, it's just great.
Yeah. The very first time I played in a professional setting with an orchestra was at that CBC competition. It was with James the Priest and the Quebec Symphony. And I just remember it was a Villalobos concerto. I had chosen that for my final. And I just remember being surrounded by this sound of, I knew the sound, I knew the concerto, I knew the pieces, everything that goes on, but to be immersed in the middle of this sound of the orchestra is just mind-bogglingly beautiful.
When I did
Then,
the
sorry, yeah.
the Andalus concerto with the Edmonton Symphony a few years ago
Ah,
in the Winspear Center, the hall itself is so great that
yeah,
it's my favorite time of playing with orchestra where I heard every part of the orchestra exactly like I wanted. Like the
yeah.
double are far away from where we're sitting, and we need to connect so many times in these Rodrigo concertos. And it was like they were just sitting next to me. Like it's like everybody was. So the experience of being immersed in this sound is really quite breathtaking.
Yeah. Then on top of it, to have 2,000 people in front of you, absolutely silent, engrossed in what you're doing. Somehow it sounds like it could be a scary thing, but no, this was such a comfort, and knowing that somehow you could feel that they're with you and they're with every note and we're shaping every note for them. It's an amazing aura somehow.
Did any of the experience of having to amplify for these things, did that get you started in microphones and a little bit towards recording? Is there any connection there, or Was it just a side interest you always had that kind of blossomed on its own?
It's a funny, very good question you asked. First of all, I always carried my own microphone and really specified very carefully as to where and what the equipment was that was going to amplify the guitar for concertos.
Right.
And it was usually very successful. And very often, Bonnie, my wife, came to do the balancing. So she ran the mixing desk as well. So she knew that in some of those low register things in the Iron West Concerto, those things, they don't never come out over the orchestra. She would bump up the thing and so on.
That's
It was, yeah, it was okay. Yes and no. From the age of 14, when I was playing in rock bands, 15 maybe, I always wanted to be a sound engineer.
you
I
want to
don't
be
admit this to too many people, but
you
yeah.
want to be the next George Martin and
Yeah, exactly. Now the weird thing is, and so of course I took this 40-year diversion, having a great concert career, and then came back to what I really ultimately felt what I wanted to do in my early youth. I really had a passion for it, and I studied electronics, I studied recording techniques and so on, all that stuff, in order to somehow fulfill my goal, but I got lost in the guitar itself. So I had this great career. And the beautiful thing about this is that I had a long-standing career as a musician, which I bring, of course, to the recording session because I'm running the session. I'm a producer on the session and directing that session in a way that I hope is not interfering, but in a way to for example to hear in a string quartet or in a baroque orchestra that the ornament is coming from the wrong way around, or I'm not hearing the oboe, or the cello is out of tune, or whatever it is. So I'm directing and running that session as a musician rather
right.
than just as a
Yeah.
recording
Well, like
technician.
sort of in the movie world, like the actors who become really good directors, they have a
Yeah.
relationship with the actors because they've been in their shoes. I can bring you back. I can sort of give you a story of a recording session you did that I heard about. So I listen to lots of podcasts and classical guitar interviews. It's one of these things I just love. Like I used to read a lot
Wow.
of on the guitar, but now it's podcast.
I
So
don't, but I must get into it because I really almost never listen to podcasts about the guitar.
it's a really fun. You listen to as much as you want. You hit stop and you just pick up where you left off the next time.
Yeah.
Um, when various players who worked with you get interviewed, then your name comes up a lot, and they talk. So it was Adam Holzman who was explaining one of his favorite practice and teaching techniques he got from a recording session with you, probably one of the earlier ones he did. And so, between takes, you asked him, Adam, do you pre-record yourself as before a session and listen back? He says, no. He says, oh, because I can hear, like in this passage, kind of, I get a sense what you're going for, but I don't think you're getting it the way you want. He's going, yeah, yeah. So that's what I used to do. I used to, before a recording session, I do my own little recording sessions and listen back. And it's true. And from that interview, I said, oh yeah, why don't I do that too? And it's always a little humbling, right? The first time you listen back, but
Oh, especially because the equipment that we have at home is makes you sound like crap, right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And but like you will hear about Norbert, the music producer in the sessions. Everybody's always super happy, and they feel like they've the ones especially that know about your time as a performer and your output and all these things. They're pretty excited to go in because they want the benefit of anything you have to suggest, and I hit that one note a little harder and the other one beside it less, and you'll see it breathes more. You go, my goodness, it does.
Yeah, yeah. It's exactly like that. The sessions, I really feel 100% involved or 150% involved. Uh, Obviously with the guitarist, but with string quartet, the same thing. The string quartet that I work with a great deal, New Zealand string quartet, for example, they claim I'm the fifth member of the quartet.
That's
But
I
it's
love.
exact.
So that's really a nice group to be the fifth member of there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's exactly that kick that I get from it. It's not, I'm not sitting there being a traffic cop for out of tune notes or missed notes or whatever, or squeaks. But it's being able to help guide that performance, trying not to interfere, guide that performance in the thought process and the interpretation that the artist is bringing, but to bring the best of him out, that him, her, that they may or may not ever realize in actual real life.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know,
that's
just going for that high G sharp. Oh, I can hear it coming, but oh, let's just do a little bit more. And finally, and as a result, it plays to the psychology of the performer because they have nobody as an audience when they're doing a recording. The microphone's in front of them, but they'll have me as an appreciative audience. Oh, that phrase was so beautiful, but right.
yeah, yeah, that's really a lovely way to go too, because it does, recording can be a little bit, antiseptic type thing. You're sitting and playing to
Yep.
the microphone. But if, yeah, like you say, you create this thing that they know there's an audience, it awakens the showmanship in us and the,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and
really cool.
it feeds, especially if somebody there in the audience is actually feeding them back, which an audience can't do directly as I can
Yeah.
over the intercom, speaking back and saying, "Oh, that phrase in measure 6 to 4 was wonderful," and so we amplify that and we grow upon the interpretation that they've brought to us. So it's great.
I had a great moment this past summer. Did a recording for with my quartet for Atma, and as we were playing, it happened once or twice in the recording session. Somewhere in my thought process, without distracting myself, I knew this was the take. I was going to make it onto this CD of something, and I could feel the myself communicate, or the music I was playing passing through me and going forward in time to whoever's going to be listening to it, because
Yeah.
that might not even be the take in the end or something, who knows, but I had this feeling of all of a sudden there was this communication between the composer imagining these lines for the first time and various people listening, and all this, just right there. And it was quite emotional as a thing. It came and went quickly, and it didn't, like, I didn't lose where I was because of it, but I had this clear, all of a sudden, like, the path was so clear in my mind, and then it was gone.
It's
uh,
amazing when that happens. It doesn't happen very often to anybody, but you feel like you're a medium from something elsewhere that, right,
yes,
from Bach or whatever.
that's right. And it's one of these things where, it might be just a way of explaining it, because we are all just bunch of wires and electrical conduits. But boy, does it feel like we're all touching something bigger and better. Um, I saw Odair Assad in an interview talking about, says, well, when my connection to the music is strong, I don't get tired. And I can play. But when it isn't, doesn't, just put the guitar down. And
Yeah,
like, that's what it must be like, on the good days, you feel like you're a medium. Exactly. Something's passing through you, and you just let it.
yeah, yeah. Magic. Music
Yeah.
is magic. I mean, and everyone seems to recognize this. And unfortunately, live music is sort of suffering a little bit because we have so many other forms of experiencing music, artificial ones. But so often I hear from people who are especially now that we've been isolated through COVID for so many years, people who have suddenly go back out to a live performance, they go, "Oh my God, what have we been missing?" And I'll never. Right?
First orchestra concert I went to after we could again. My wife and I went to hear National Arts Center play, and what was the repertoire again? It was Schumann, because there was a Schumann concerto for piano, and then the was it another Schumann? Anyway, but we had really close up seats, and many of the people, we know many of the people in the orchestra, because when you live in a town and you're a musician, you know these
Yeah,
people, and just sitting them on stage, and you could see they gave you a little wink as they were sitting up. Oh, look who's here, And then when the sound started, and the no microphones, no speakers between us, direct. I did cry, which is sounds like phony baloney, but I had tears in my eyes, because it was just like, oh my God, this I missed this.
some
Uh,
concerts are just so moving. It's phenomenal. Yeah,
well, any, like, we all see, like, this is sort of a sideways through, but we've all seen movies with, like, these action movies where there's so much violence, and we don't bat an eye at it.
yeah,
But if you just see out in the streets two people really get mad and one throw a punch that lands, and you see it in front of you, oh God, the tension and the fright, how
yeah,
real it is. Well, in a nice way, music is the same thing. When you go see a concert, you don't know the piece is going to go through perfectly without flaws. It might fall apart right in the middle. You don't know. So anything that happens that's beautiful is this magic thing that could not have happened. When you're listening
yeah.
to a recording, unless they put out a really bad recording, it's going to go well. You can enjoy it, but there's no surprise, there's no danger, there's no, yeah.
Yeah, and it often sounds cooked up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, there have been musicians who refuse to record. Celi Balache, the great Romanian conductor. There are some evidences of him recording only in that things have been gathered or there have been television things or whatever, but for in essentially he did not record. And there have been others who really refused to record because you can't bottle it. He felt you can't really package that and
Yeah.
have it.
So how did talking about packaging and bottling, how did the relationship with Naxos start?
It began, I had been recording with Chandos. I did 4 CDs with Chandos prior to Naxos, and this was in the mid to late 80s. And they're a very good company, a wonderful company in Britain. The first one I did was quite emotional for me, very moving in that they allowed me to do 20th century repertoire. We did the Britten Nocturnal, the Tippett Blue Guitar Sonata, and Maurice Schaeffer's Cri de Merlin, which he wrote for me. And the beautiful thing was we did it at the Maltings Concert Hall in Snape, which is where Britain had the Aldborough Festival every year, where Bream would have premiered the Nocturnal. And I was recording the Nocturnal in this same space. It was, heartrending in a way. It was an amazing acoustic, a beautiful sound in there, just a gorgeous acoustic. And for them to have invested in a 20th century guitar recording was really quite a big step. Anyway, I did 4 recordings for them. The last one, the final one, I felt that they were getting lower and lower standards. The hall was less. We were in a different hall. The producer was very edgy, and time was always looking at the clock. So I spoke with the distributor for Chandos at the time, who was SRI Records in Peterborough, and he said, "Oh, if you're going to leave Chandos, go to Naxos." This was, I think, 1988. Naxos was just getting off the ground. And I thought, budget company. He said, no, 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 no. They're going to be the last man standing. They're going to be one of the most important record companies. Sure enough, he was right. And so it began with me sending a fax at the time. This was before internet, sending a fax to the boss at Naxos, who was in Hong Kong. Head office is Hong Kong. And he liked what he heard from my recordings from Chandos. And he said, well, send me a list of what you'd like to record, whatever, lifelong list or whatever. And I thought he would. So I sent him a list of about 20 recordings. And I thought he would kind of go, okay, this one and that one, we'll start there, the way Chandos did with a couple. He said, let's record all of them. How fast can you do them? He wanted to build an instant guitar catalog. He had built an instant orchestral catalog already. They had recorded all the Mozart symphonies, all the Beethoven, I mean, everything. He built basically an instant catalog of Naxos within a very few short years. So, and they were in the process at that time of recording all of the Liszt piano music. And they had 2 pianists a week recording in this studio in Santa Rosa in California. And he thought that I could record the same way, 2 CDs a week. What? So I realized instantly my life changed. And this was in 1994, I believe. So first we recorded, actually another big step for Naxos, we recorded the 3 concertos, the 3 most popular concertos, Villalobos, Tedesco, and Aranjuez, in Britain with a wonderful orchestra, the BBC Manchester Orchestra. The members of the BBC Manchester Orchestra, anyways, without conductor, which was a bit scary. Not so much for Rodrigo and Tedesco, because they're basically tempos are set and they stay, and tempos are set by the guitar. But Villalobos, tempos flex all over the place. It's chamber music. The beautiful thing was that everybody realized that they were playing chamber music. So when the French horn had a little solo or the cello had a solo, it was chamber music. Anyway, so from there, Klaus from Naxos, the boss, was interested in recording really all of the guitar repertoire, preferably overnight. So I enlisted a bunch of my colleagues, people that I respected and knew, many of them Americans, and we began the first big project that we began as a community, as it were, was the SOAR, recording all of the SOAR solo guitar repertoire. So that's 16 CDs. Then we recorded various other things. We did Ponce. You mentioned Adam Holtzman. He did a couple of Ponce CDs for us. We did Kost. We started to embark on really all of the major repertoire, and we're still in it. This is 30 years later almost. We're still trying to finish the Kost. We still have 2 CDs to go. And we're recording, as Naxos puts it, an encyclopedic repertoire of in this case, the guitar repertoire. So I got caught up in this process, which I love doing. First, I kept my career going. I was still touring a lot while we were recording other people. So Bonnie and I were both involved equally. I shouldn't say equally because I basically set up the sessions, did a little bit of directing of the session along which, but then the big work, of course, as you know, is the editing. A session is 2 or 3 days. Editing is sometimes 3 weeks, usually 2 weeks. So she was doing all of the editing for the first many, many years, for the first 10, 15 years of our recordings for Naxos. She's kind of stepped away from it, partly because I really love doing it. I took a holiday from touring, and it was meant to be really just a tiny sabbatical. 2 years, I told my manager. And it felt so great, mostly to work on my own repertoire and develop recording and do my own recordings. It felt so great not to get in another airline lineup, live in a junky hotel and eat bad food and so on. 2 years holiday became kind of 4 years and ultimately became forever. Partly because at the time, yeah, I was learning our new repertoire and so on, but I also took on more recording gigs. I took on I took on a lot of what I really love to do, which is running more sessions and many. So we were doing 20, 25 CDs a year, both of us together. And now that she stepped away from it, kind of, I'm still doing about 10 or 12 CDs a year recording.
And how early in this process did you start doing non-guitar things?
Very early on. I'm trying to think. I mean, it really began with my own recordings for myself, for Naxos. And then very soon, as I mentioned, within a couple of years, we were recording other people doing guitar. The first step that was taken doing that, Klaus, the boss at Naxos, called up and said, "Are you capable of recording a Baroque orchestra who is in Toronto, who is based where you are, and we need recording production done for them?" And I thought, how hard can it be? A couple of mics, a couple of extra mics, who knows?
Yeah.
How hard can it be? So we began recording what is now the Aradia Ensemble and various forms of the Aradia Ensemble. They also have not only Baroque, but a classical period instrument group. And so we've done now, I'm guessing, 50 CDs with the Aradia Ensemble from then on. So I think that was about 1996. So still pretty early on in my association with Naxos.
Great. And the Laureate series, who came up with that? Which is great. Oh,
because I remember one time Klaus was at our dining table here. He'd come every year and we'd have dinner together. And he said, okay, stepping back really, Naxos was this encyclopedic company that wanted only repertoire. In fact, I shouldn't say it like this, but they'd be happier if the artist wasn't even mentioned, that they didn't want to deal with the artist. They just wanted the music. And I remember one time after we had done the Laureate series for a few years, he was sitting here at the table going, "So why," in this very heavy German accent, so why are these selling so well? Okay, because the guy's picture is on the front, the artist's picture is on the front. It's a mixed repertoire, which for the guitar was the main thing, still is to some extent. And they come out within the year of recording. It's basically a fresh recording. It doesn't wait 2 or 3 years to come forward, and has all of these ingredients that really speak well to the marketplace for guitarists. So the Laureate series was my way of coming up with a mixed program. And the other one is the sort of national series, like music of Brazil, music of Colombia, those things.
Great.
Yeah,
boy, I like those.
Aren't they nice? Yeah. And so we have people from Colombia or Brazil or wherever playing the repertoire that they really know and really love. But it's also mixed composers. There's 4 or 5 or 8 composers on these recordings often.
Well,
so that was my brainchild in a way, in order to come up with a way of recording not just all of the Sor and all of the Giuliani, all of the Carulli, but a mixed bag of things that have a theme, a very strongly related theme.
Most of the people who are guitarists who also buy albums of the guitar, we go mostly with the performer first. If somebody, I'll take Judicael Perrois, who's a good buddy, but also really one of my favorite players, whatever album he's coming out next, sure, I'm curious to know what the repertoire is, sure, but I'll get it anyway, no matter what, like no questions asked, because it's him. And then, and it's kind of like that. And maybe it's because we're an instrument group where we don't have the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the Brahms who wrote for it. We've got fantastic composers, but we just don't have the triple A list. Maybe because of that, we tend to enjoy whatever repertoire it is, but how well is it performed is what we
Yeah,
want. We want, you know.
absolutely. I mean, the guitarists are listening to the guitar player.
Yeah,
And this was a real antithesis to the Naxos system in that the artist was really kind of secondary to the repertoire. But you know, if you think back into the before our time, really into the
yeah,
40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, when Horowitz would come every year to Massey
yeah,
Hall or to wherever he was playing Place des Arts, they would come with a mixed repertoire. They'd start with the Mozart sonata, the Beethoven sonata, maybe Schumann at the end, or something like that. And it was always that kind of thing, and they would record the same thing. Remember, in the 60s and 70s, I was buying records, the same thing as what you just said. I would buy
yeah.
this year's new album from John Williams, this year's new release from Julian Bream. Didn't matter what was on it, I wanted to hear him play.
Yeah, sight unseen, just
Yeah,
I'll buy it and figure out. Yeah, and it's
yeah,
part of our collective psyche, I guess. Um,
yeah.
okay, we're not necessarily at the end, but I do want to throw in so that people, because honestly, I think this has been really great just to sort of understand your passions. I'm thrilled that it's something I didn't know about you, that you always wanted to be who you became, the record producer. That's kind of nice in a way, that it didn't just sort of happen. It's that it's always was within you. I also want to ask you about the cycling thing, because
Ah,
anybody who now knows there's this other part of your life where you get on a bike, and there's stories of some young guitar hotshots that come record with you who are also cyclists, and then they get on a bike and they go with you and they're 22 and in top shape, and then they go, I couldn't follow him, and then I heard from you about this same later, going, oh yeah, I was going really slow that day too. So
that's really funny. I can think of two people who are exactly fit that description. You know, since about I guess when I turned about all right, trying to think. When I turned about 35, I realized that just sitting on my tush in a really awkward position, twisted to one side, holding a guitar for 8 hours a day, it's kind of an unhealthy occupation. And I realized that I had to do some other things in order to stay healthy physically and in order to even feed the ability to play and let my fingers work. Um, but the bicycle really became a strong passion when I turned 50. And that was, I was still playing the guitar a lot at that point. But it was soon after I had had a strange injury, and again, I had become quite active physically in many things. I worked on my car, for example. I did construction work. I gardened, and I had created an injury to my shoulder in roughly the mid '90s that put me off playing the guitar for almost a year. I had to stop some concerts. I could only hold the guitar, if at all, on my right leg, and I couldn't really play everything that way. So I basically couldn't hold my left arm up to the guitar. So as part of the rehab of this, I started doing weights and started to really get even a stronger physical condition, which had its sort of byproduct. I was doing not really super heavy weights, but fairly heavy weights, considering what a classical musician normally would do. And I found that that gave me just an incredible stature and foundation upon which to let my fingers become free. I even did weight sessions sometimes before I had a concerto that night. I would go into the hotel weight room, do some presses and do some curls and so on. And I just felt so strong and so stable. So, anyways, all of that became finally, as I sort of said goodbye to my playing career, became turned into this other passion on the bicycle, which is, of course, a very physical activity, but became something of a competitive activity as well. I did some racing in the early years, and I still spend lots of time on the bike. I have a house in Florida, which is specifically so that I can continue training through the winter. It's the only reason I would go to Florida. And literally, I do 400 kilometers a week on the bicycle in order to stay healthy. And initially, it was in order to stay healthy so that I could continue doing my playing career, stay healthy so that I'm strong and energetic on the sessions when I'm producing a recording session, that my mind is active and that I'm still able to communicate. And despite aging, to kind of stave off old man time.
Right. I mean, it must be beautifully meditative too when you're in good shape and you're out on the bike and like, the world is kind of floating by you and you're floating through it and yet you're zipping and you're doing something that's very vigorous at the same time. It must be really great for the mind.
That's a very romantic impression of it. It is suffering. It is just constant suffering. No, there are times, for example, when I go to France, and I used to go every year for a month to the high mountains in France or in Italy. Not only was it, yeah, it was hard work going up the hills and really suffering. Really, I worked very hard at it, but there were so many beautiful moments cruising down at 80 kilometers an hour and also the beautiful people and the beautiful countryside and so on. So yeah, there's that. We haven't talked about the kayak yet, so that's
Oh,
another.
I didn't even know there was a kayak outside. Oh, do tell.
Next interview.
That's right. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we really covered sort of honestly, if I maybe we can just sort of finish with the teaching aspect because you did start very early and you have a legacy of people in and around Toronto where you are a large branch of the family tree that when I first met Jeff McFadden, we were chatting and like, oh, what's your? And he says, well, basically, I came up under Norbert, and like that's you know, and as an influence, that's huge. And then he went on, like he's gone on to teach so many people, and he's himself. He's not a duplicate of you whatsoever, but it is
Yeah.
you guys are part of a larger family tree um, that you
Yeah.
can think
And
like, how do you see your legacy as a teacher, if
it
at all?
it is wonderful to have as a way paved the way for people to have their careers, whatever they may be, whether they're as teachers, whether they're as performer teachers, or simply performers. Just to know, I occasionally get some kind of communications from students that I had lost contact with for 20 years. There was a young woman who is in, where is she, in Connecticut, somewhere in the kind of New England area, who's teaching and playing concerts and chamber music and so on. And she reached out. I forget exactly what it was about, but we communicated for a little while to see that they're doing well and they're really succeeding and they're really applying. I hope that I've had some influence in propelling that kind of a career. And I can think of a lot of young players that came through my studio that really have that sort of the same backstory. And it's just beautiful to know that we've set up a career. And I feel the same way in essence for the from the laureate series that you mentioned. The laureates are the competition winners who have won either GFA or Alessandria competition. That we have given them a huge step up, a huge stepping stone toward the beginning of a career that obviously is deserved, and that they have a big future ahead of them, largely because of what we're doing for them right at this moment, either recording or in the case of teaching from 20, 30 years ago.
Right. Well, there we go. I think
Yeah,
that set off quite beautifully. I mean,
wonderful.
you sort of you got into the instrument. You probably do you see yourself having been satiated for your appetite as a player of repertoire and concerts and thinking, I got out, but I don't think there's anything really I wish I would have done. I kind of got to do it all because I was speaking years ago with a fellow who had been the National Arts Centre's main violinist for years, and when he retired, he was saying, "Oh, being first violin of NACO for like 20 years, I really got everything I ever wanted to do, and I could do chamber projects too. So once I retired from NACO, and oh, I haven't practiced in a week. Oh, better get my violin out, and then oh, I haven't practiced in 2 weeks. It's just I'm not tired of it or anything like that, but he didn't have anything left to say, but he felt he'd had enough.
I don't know. Yep. And yeah, I have to say that I admit to the same thing. I left my career at a time when my career was really at its peak, at its absolute peak. And I didn't plan to leave. I wasn't planning to retire or leave my career at all. Uh, but the wonderful thing was, it wasn't because I was kind of losing it or getting too old or having memory lapses or any of that stuff. It was really at the point where I felt that I had pretty well done it all. Many times people ask me, well, do you still play? And do you not even just play for fun? Fun. It's 8 hours of practicing a day and scales and all that stuff. Far from fun. But I, of course, miss the good stuff. But I really feel that I have done as much as I wanted to through playing on the guitar, and that I've moved on to another career that is equally satisfying and equally important in our little world, anyways. And in the larger world, the chamber music and orchestra stuff that I record, in the same way, is fully important and fully satisfying and fully involving for me on a day-to-day basis.
Well, let me ask you then this way. Do you still have nails?
There they
There.
are. Do you know, they're not as long as they used to be because they keep breaking off because I keep doing things. I'm in the middle of building a table, and at the moment I'm planing and scraping this table. So normally they're longer, but I could still play if I had to with these things.
That's really, whenever I run into people who were like former colleagues who maybe don't play anymore, and we, hey, how's it going? We shake hands. I always take a quick look. Is there still nail on that, right? Yeah.
Still nails? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very funny. But for some reason I keep protecting my nails, and Bonnie keeps saying, well, what for? What are you worried about your nails for?
You get used
I
to it.
remember,
Yeah.
yeah, there was one time I was lying under my car changing the brakes. I had an old Jaguar that I was working on. And I was changing brakes. I was whatever, and I was all covered in black. And Bonnie came out of the house. She said, "Norb, you got to get up. You got to wash your hands." Vancouver Symphony called. Christopher Parkening had three concerts. They had a concert series of three concerts. Christopher Parkening can't make the third one because there was a nationwide strike or a province-wide strike or something. You have to get on a plane tomorrow, do a rehearsal, and play Iron West tomorrow night. So there it was, and I played fine. It was great, and I still didn't have grease under my nails anymore.
There.
So there are so many things in my life that I have moved onward to, that I feel also that sitting, and I really had to practice hard. I had to practice a lot. I know there's a lot of musicians and guitarists for sure that claim they only practice an hour and a half a day. I could never survive on that. I needed minimum 5, 6 hours just to stay in shape, and then more than that if I was learning a lot of new repertoire and so on. So
Yeah,
a
that's
lot of things that,
past a
yeah,
certain, unless you have nothing else to do, like unless that is your entire career, and you don't have other interests.
yeah, yeah. And I need to foster these other instruments now. So interests now. So.
Very nice. Well, thank you very
Mm.
much. Thanks for your time. You and I have met a bunch of times, but I got to know you even better today, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and don't hold the accordion against me. Been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Louis. It was really great. It was a beautiful interview. It's wonderful. Great questions and just wonderful chatting back and forth. Just great.
Thanks.